Hello and welcome to another wonderful Max MSP tutorial. I am Andrew Robinson, and in this video I'm going to show you all the absolute basics of everything you need to know in Max MSP to get started. If you have never touched Max MSP before, this is going to be the video for you because I am going to talk about all the basics, and hopefully by the end of the video everything is going to make sense. So let's just jump right into it, shall we? First thing you need to know is what exactly is Max MSP? Well, Max MSP is a computer programming graphical language. So rather than typing out lines of code, we create object boxes that have very specific functions, and we just patch them together. And depending on the function in the object box and how you patch it together, we're going to get different results. This right here is an object box. And we know it's an object box because it's got these gray borders and it's rectangular. And here's some examples of some objects. We've got a metro with 30 in it. That means it sends out a bang every 30 milliseconds. We got a random 100 in it. Its job function is to output a random number between 0 and 99 because that's 100 random numbers. We've got this cell 123, which its job is to send out bangs depending on the incoming value. If it matches a 1, it's going to send a bang out of the 1 outlet. If it receives a 2, it's going to send a bang out of the 2 outlet. And you might have so many questions right now, like what the heck are you talking about with these bangs and these outlets? What are those? That is a great question. If you look here at this object, there's this little semicircle on top and a little semicircle on bottom. Those are your inlets and your outlets. And we patch objects in Max MSP by clicking and dragging patch cords from our outlets to inlets. And the data of information flows through those patch cords and then matches the function, and that changes the data in some way, and we get different results on that. In order to write code in Max MSP or do anything, we have to unlock our patch. That is this little lock icon here in the bottom left corner. If you just click on that and unlock it, suddenly you can click and drag things around or resize them in some way. It basically lets you edit the code. If things are locked though, we interface with our code. So I can't click and drag things around right now, but I could click on something like this and it lights up when I click on it. That's a key thing to know about Max MSP, is that we have to be unlocked in order to edit code. So I already wrote all the code out because I thought that would be the easiest way to show you guys what's going on. But I'm going to also kind of rebuild it to show you how to do that. So if I click on the lock icon and unlock my patch, I can double click anywhere in this blank space to create an object box. And then I would just type into it metro 30 if I wanted to create a metro object that outputs a bang every 30 milliseconds. And you can see as I started to type that, we get this drop down list of a bunch of objects and a brief description of what those objects do. And you can see that metro says outputs a bang message at regular intervals. That is why I had to type in 30. I typed in the rest of the word metro, and we see that there's an argument in this drop-down list now, and it says interval and that it's a number. So it's letting you know that it wants you to type in a number after you type in the word metro. And if I, again, just to follow the example I set up, I typed 30. So now we have created a metro object at 30 milliseconds. Again, I want to create another object. I showed you that you can double click anywhere in this blank space to create an object, but you can also click on this icon up here. And look, it just created this object down here, which I'm now dragging and pulling up here. And I'm going to type in random 100, and again, as I started to type in that word, we get that drop down list of all the objects that start with the letters that I am typing with, and we see that there's random as one of them, and it generates a random number. I typed in the rest of the word random, and now that I did that, we see there are 2 arguments this time. It says range int and seed int, and int just stands for a number. It's just another way of saying number. Integer, integers are numbers. So we just give it a number. and I'm going to give it 100, and that's the first one. That's range. So it's a range of 100 random numbers. And then C has to do with how random generates numbers. Sometimes Max MSP has default values, so that's why you don't see a second number over here. But I could type in a second number, and now our seed for our random generator is 40. If you don't know what a seed for random is, don't worry about it. We'll talk about that in a future tutorial video. And again, I clicked on this icon to create this object box, but I can click the N key on my keyboard, and that will also create an object. And then I'm going to type into it cell, and it's kind of off the screen, and I didn't type any numbers into it this time, and you see it looks slightly different than this cell object over here. I typed in 1, 2, 3 here, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 outlets. I didn't type anything over here, and we only have 1, 2 outlets. And you'll see if I go back and I type in those numbers, 1, 2, 3, we suddenly now have those many outlets. That is a function with the cell object and some other objects in Max MSP. If you define certain parameters or attributes, it may create more outlets based on the function of the object. Just a thing to know, but don't stress about it too much right now. So there are some examples of some objects and how you make objects. This here is a message box. It's like an object box, except it modifies an object. It changes the way the object performs its function. It also can store and output data, and we notice that it looks slightly different from an object box too. It doesn't have the gray borders, and its corners are rounded, so it's not as rectangular. That's how you can tell the difference between the two. And again, all a message box does is it modifies how an object changes its function, and it can store and output data. So let's look at the examples we have provided here. If I lock my patch real quick, we can interface with these objects, and you see that the value 14 is stored in this message box, and this patch cord is coming from its outlet into this number box that says 0. If I click on the message, it's going to output its value through that patch cord into our integer box, and you see that it worked because the integer box updated to the value 14. So that's how data flow works too. This value just came right out that patch cord and was set into this object box. So that's how messages output data. But they can also store data because if we unlock our patch real quick, you can see that there is this right inlet over here that is blue, and it says set the message without output. So anything that's patched into this inlet, it's just going to set whatever that is into this message box. So this here is called a toggle, and all it does is it outputs a 0 or a 1, and if we click on it, we can change it. So I'm going to lock the patch, and I'm going to click on it, and we see that it is outputting a 0 through this patch cord, and if I click on it, now it's outputting a 1, and I click on it, it's a 0, so it's like an on-off switch, but it sends out a 0 or a 1, 0 being off, 1 being on, and we see how the message box is storing that value. It can also modify an object. I did mention that, and that is the main function of messages actually, is to modify objects. We have this object called jit.noise, and it's got some other stuff in here. Don't worry about that. I'm going to talk about jitter in a future tutorial video. The key thing to know is that when I click this button and bam, it creates this image, we see that it is 3 squares long and 3 down. That's our X and Y axis. And we know that it's going to do that because there's 3 and 3 here. So this is a 3 by 3 matrix, meaning we have 3 squares on our x-axis and 3 on our y-axis. If I change the value of this dim message to say 3030, and then I lock my patch and I click on that, the message dim 3030 got sent through this patch cord, and basically updated this 3x3 to be 30x30. Now, nothing visually changed, but we know that internally in the object, its function changed because that's what the message did. And now when we click on this button to update what we see in this little window, we see we now have 30 squares on our x-axis and 30 squares on our y-axis. And it's because, as I said, this dim 3030 updated the function of this object internally. And that there are so many messages, and how they modify objects in different ways depends totally on the object. But it's really valuable for getting exactly the precise thing you want to do happen. So keep that in mind. The main thing with this example, though, that I just showed that you might not be aware of is exactly why I needed to click on this button to update this window. And that is because objects in Max MSP will not perform their function unless they receive a bang. And it is the function of this button to send out a bang when it's clicked. Now, we can see over in this example right here, I have this object called counter, and I set the parameters 1 and 10. That's the minimum and the maximum. So it's going to count between 1 and 10 repeatedly. And the way counter works is it needs to receive a bang in order to count. And like I just said, that is common for every object in Max MSP. All objects need to receive a bang in order to perform their function. So I click on the button whose function is to output a bang when clicked on. That bang gets sent through this patch cord into the counter object that knows to count when it receives the bang, and then it outputs its count value through this patch cord into this integer box. And we can see that work because I just clicked the button and bam, it counted to 1. I click it again, it counts to 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time I click it, it's going to count up until it hits 10, and then I click it again and it goes back to 1 because, as I said, we set that parameter here in the counter object. But maybe you don't want to have somebody have to click on this button in order to output a bang. There is an object that does that for us, and that is this Metro object. And its function is to output a bang at a specified time interval. We already talked about that up here when we were creating objects. I set it up here to be 30 milliseconds, but here I have it set to 1,000 milliseconds because 1,000 milliseconds equals 1 second. So every 1 second, a bang is going to come out of this patch cord, hit this button, which is going to light it up so we know that it's working. The bang is going to pass along through into the counter object and cause the counter object to start counting without me actually having to click on that button. All we got to do is send a 1 to this Metro to tell it to turn on. That's, why this toggle works great as an on-off switch, because the 1 tells the Metro to turn on. So when I click on the toggle, it turns on and we see it starts counting every second. And that is very useful for a lot of reasons, because now I don't have to click on it. And you might be asking yourself at this point, how do I know all this stuff? Is it just because I've been doing Max MSP programming for a long time? That is the answer. Yes, I have been doing it for a long time, but I also know this stuff because Max MSP has great documentation on how objects work. You can check what's called the help files to learn everything you want to learn about any object in Max MSP. If we click on our lock icon to unlock the patch real quick, we can right-click on any object and click open that object. So in this case, Metro help, and it pulls up this window, which is the help file for how the Metro object works. And it's got a description and detail of the object, and it provides examples for how the object works. So we can see that they have a toggle going in their Metro to start and stop it. That's how I knew I needed to send a toggle to my Metro. And we see that we have this feature that lets us set the time interval in milliseconds by clicking and dragging on it. So that's, how I knew to set the time interval for my Metro. And we can click on it and we can see that it's working in their example too. and they've got great explanations for how these objects works, and you can play with their examples all day long. And the help file is helpful for so many other reasons other than just providing great examples, because it's also got this list over here of all the messages that the object that you have the help file open for accepts. So you can send any of these messages to your Metro object to modify how the Metro works. We've also got attributes, which are parameters you can change with messages too. And then we see this list, which is a list of objects that are similar to the Metro. So they're like the Metro in how they work, but they work slightly differently. And you can click on any one of them, and it's going to pull up the help file for that object. So it's a great way to learn about how objects work and learn about new objects, and maybe how some objects might have similar functions but slightly different uses depending on what you're trying to do. Honestly, even though I have been doing Max MSP for a long time, I still reference the help file for pretty much everything because it is so useful to just always check the help file. And that's what this little doohickey bit of code over here is supposed to remind you of. I have created this toggle, which is going to output a 0 or 1 through this patch cord, turning on our Metro, which I have set to 500 milliseconds. So every half a second, a bang is going to come out of the Metro. It's going to hit our counter object, which is going to tell it to count. That count value is going to come through this patch cord into this integer box object, and that value is then going to be output through this patch cord into this cell object, which has a lot of inlets and a lot of outlets. But you want to send the integer into the inlet, the leftmost inlet, because it says value to be tested. If you highlight over these, you see it says set value 1 to match. So that means where this 1 is, it's going to change that value from a 1 to whatever value you send it. Could be useful for certain reasons, but we've predefined that we want the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you can see on our outlet side that it says bang if input matches 1, bang if input matches 2. This would be bang if input matches 3, so on and so forth. And the last one sends out a bang if the input doesn't match. So that means that this integer value is going to come through this patch cord, and it's going to say, is it a 1? If it's a 1, send a bang out through this patch cord. If it's a 2, send a bang out through this patch cord. If it's a 3, send a bang out through this patch cord. And all these patch cords are set to different messages. And the message can, like we talked about, stores a value or whatever. So in this case, it's storing the word. Always check the help files, exclamation points. And we've got this. It's called a comment box. That's this icon up here. And basically a comment box is just to write comments to yourself so you remember things. That's what all of these are over here. They're comment boxes. These are comment boxes. Super useful for reminding yourself what you're doing when you're doing things. And we can send messages to change the content of a comment box if we wanted to. In this case, I do. I want to change the content of this message box using the SetMessage, which I knew how to do because I opened the help file for the comment box, and I saw over here it says SetMessage, display a message. The word set followed by any message will set the comment object to display that message, and they have examples of that, set and a 2. So now this comment says and a 2. So guess what? I knew that with that method, I could make this comment box say always check the help files just by clicking on the Metro, because all this data flow is going to go through these patch cords and cause this to be the final output. So let's go ahead and do that. My patch is locked. I click on the Metro, and there it goes. It's counting. Always check the help files. Bam. Always check the help files. Bam. Okay, cool. That could be a very fun, useful code. I had fun building it. I hope that reminds you very much to always check the help files, because I cannot emphasize how important that is for getting started in Max MSP. The help files are going to be your guide to getting better and better and better at programming in Max MSP. I hope this was a useful tutorial for you guys. I hope that by looking at everything already nicely laid out, it's very clear what these basic concepts are, and these are just the basics. There's some more basic stuff that I'm going to make or explain in a part 2 video pretty soon. So please stay tuned for that. You should subscribe if you want, because that makes me feel good, and it'll send you a reminder when that part 2 video comes out, plus when any of my other videos come out. And I'm trying to do a lot of cool things. I'm trying to show you how to build some fun stuff in Max MSP 2, and I'm trying to show you some of the fun stuff that I build in Max MSP. So please subscribe, like this video, leave some comments, especially if you have any questions and you want something to be further clarified. I am here to help you guys learn, so any kind of question you have, I will answer it in detail. You better believe that. And with that, I'm going to sign off on this video, guys, okay? I'm going to see you in part 2 pretty soon. Until then, have a great time programming Max MSP, being a computer programmer. Peace out.